Calling all beings. Calling all beings.
Party people, put your hands together for calling all beings. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Money Nathan.
Wow,
He's
I like this.
on the mic.
I love the smooth intro. This is new. I like this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what. Welcome back to Calling All Beings. I'm your host, DJ. And yes, after going after a high-profile guest today, I think his assistant took a look at Mike. Mike doesn't sound good, Jules. Let me check. Or maybe that's Mike as in Michael.
Seems
So
good.
yeah, which I would say the same thing. No, my mic, I got the right mic on there. So you guys let me know if there's any issues. So yeah, the whole high profile guest assistant, I think, listened to the show, probably heard me yell and was like, he's booked for the rest of the year. I'll tell you guys about that one later, who it was, because Nathan can be like, I don't want him on anyway.
That's right.
Anyway.
Get him out of here. Get him out of here.
Welcome back to Calling All Beings. That voice you hear is the executive producer, the co-creator, the technical director, and my brother, Money Nathan.
What is going on, everybody? Happy Wednesday evening. It's a beautiful night here. Absolutely gorgeous outside. A little cool, not too cool for the time of the year, but doesn't matter really what's happening out there. I'm excited about what's happening right here. Very thrilled to have this guy back with us. It's going to be a good show.
Can I get an amen?
Yes.
Amen.
And right there, the voice you just heard is a woman. I'll tell you what, all I can say about her in this community is she's the legend, the researcher, the head of research, and our paragon of virtue, and our sister from another mister. That is a study of UAPs. Debs, who's soon to be called author.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to say I'm excited for us to have a discussion about everywhere and every when.
Yes.
I'm telling you, man. So mix in the chat. Julie, welcome back, Jules. Vinny Adams in the joint, along with his homegirl Carolina from Carolina. So the ancestor of Francisco Pizarro, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, all right, so let's introduce the guest of honor. This gentleman right here is a professor of anthropology at Montana Technological University. He is a second-time guest here on CAB. He's written several books. He's brilliant. He is a favorite. Everybody I talk to is just like, I love Mike Masters, including Dr. Pasolka. Everybody loves this man. And if you haven't heard him, you're going to figure out why. Real quick, so party people, put those hands together for Dr. Michael Masters. Can I get a
hello, everyone? Hello. In there,
Amen.
out here.
Welcome, Dr. Masters. Thank you so much for joining us again. It is an honor, truly. How have you been?
The honor is all mine. Good. Yeah, I was apologizing for the delay. We're actually only 5 minutes out. That's not bad.
Good, man.
Yeah, but no, good. We finally got some snow here in southwest Montana. It's been completely barren until now. So fortunately, I'm nursing an MCL injury, but hoping to get over that and get on the slopes here in the next week or so.
Well, the MCL, that shouldn't interrupt our foosball match, though, right?
No, we're good. I'm still planning on kicking your ass in foos. That's not an issue.
I want to get us trashed.
Although I will point out that the 18 inches of snow we got is currently sitting on the foosball table. I had to move it out to get a fireplace put in back there for the end times.
Snowblower.
Yeah, but no, we can shovel it off. I've got a waterproof tarp on it, but we'll be standing about probably 40 inches above it in the snow. Could be kind of an advantage, actually.
Could be.
I got to tell you though, Dr. Masters, you know, I love a lot of different sports, including soccer, which is obviously, you know, what foosball is modeled after. But right now, Six Nations It's actually going on live now. And then last year's tournament is on Netflix, this Rugby Six Nations thing. And if you haven't seen it or anybody in the audience hasn't seen it, it's awesome. What'd you think?
I've watched it in the past. I haven't been watching this one, but I've tuned in a few times. When I was doing a dig at a Neanderthal site in southern France, like half the people I worked with were huge rugby players and fans, and that tournament was going on back then. So we would all schlep across this big what do they call them? Winery, like a vineyard, I guess.
Vineyard, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Into the local town and get some beers and watch some rugby. So I do enjoy it, but it's been a while since I've partaken.
Wow. Yeah, I've never seen it. This is all new to me, and I'm kind of thinking, should I have played football or rugby? I'm kind of thinking rugby right now. But anyway, let's get to the lecture at hand, because these people didn't come here to hear me yak about this business. So, Mike, I'm curious, what was it like the moment that your hypothesis that you've had and you've written about went from theoretical to, proven to be real to you, which was that moment, your moment of contact, if you will, that don't sue me, James, please. But anyway, but seriously, all kidding aside, what was it like that you're like, I've had this hypothesis, I've written about this, and now it's real?
Well, I'm still waiting on that moment, to be honest. I'm not there yet. I do feel like it's worthy of our consideration, but I feel strongly that it explains part of the phenomenon, but I don't know what part or what percentage of the spectrum, because it's a wide spectrum. As your listeners know, there's a lot of different things going on. So, no, I think it would take something really definitive for me to be like, oh, cool. All right. That's validating, I guess. But I don't feel like we're anywhere close to that right now, to be honest.
From a standpoint of they approached you and knew things that, you had been washing your dishes and had these thoughts, and I don't know if you espoused them to your wife or not.
I didn't tell anybody. That's kind of how they broke me down, is they knew something I hadn't said out loud at all. But to be honest, I don't consider that to be validating, because they alluded to being future humans. They either put a thought in my head when I asked them how they knew about that thought that I didn't outwardly vocalize, not that it matters, as I found out. They either put in my head future humans as a question of my voice, or I said that telepathically. But again, it's the first time I've ever said anything telepathically or even thought I should try this. It wasn't even that I tried. It just came out through my forehead, future humans as a question. And then they moved on and said, well, now you know how we know that thought, in parentheses. So I talked about this a little bit in New York City conference that Jay and James and Leslie put on last month, 2 months ago, because they sort of left it open. They didn't definitively say, yes, we're future humans. They knew the future. They put 3 things in my brain that are supposedly going to come out in the future, but they never definitively said that. So without that, I don't feel comfortable saying, yes, these were future humans and this theory is validated.
That's awesome. That's a very fair answer. And it just shows how scientific you are, even about your own experiences. You're able to not, be biased by your own experiences, which is great. So,
yeah, I mean, it's something to be critical of. And I think because it's so far removed, all experiences are so far removed from conventional reality that I think the default state should just be stepping back and like, wait, let's look at this in the context of other things. And so, yeah, I started breaking down the nuances of that interaction. And I feel it's more important for me to say what happened and not bias it with my own interpretation, because I have developed some ideas about what might have been going on, who exactly I was communicating with in those moments. But I feel it's more important at this point just to sort of take it for what it was, combine it with everything else from other pieces of, little nuggets they throw out, the literature, people's experiences, and then just kind of put it into a big experiencer stew and add a little salt and just sip on it slowly.
We want to keep it low sodium, but anyway, let me pass it on to Money Nathan.
Yeah, I love that. So Darren and I talk about some of the experiences that he's had and I know you and Darren have had some conversations.
Yeah, he was the first person I reached out to when I was losing my goddamn mind over what reality is all of a sudden. Because he was really therapeutic for me, because I happened to come across a podcast episode he did previously that explained his experiences. And I was like, oh my God, this is so similar. I got to reach out to this guy. And we kind of already knew each other. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's great. And anyway, we were talking about the way that he's trying to explain to me the way that he kind of compiles information, and it's not linear per se. It's sort of he gets things that happen to him in his life, and some of them don't make sense in the time, but then later on they become sort of recontextualized, and it's almost like I think of it almost like an origami, like it kind of unfolds, and then there's a whole picture emerges. So is that something that you kind of you're sensing with this? Is it piecing together parts of your past experience and kind of recontextualizing that, making it clearer for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd had precognition my entire life, and I was just having a conversation with a mutual friend of Darren's, and probably yours too, and lots of other people, longtime experiencer, and we started talking about various things that have happened, and I start looking back through my own past, thinking that most of this weirdness that I've been forced to reconceptualize my worldview and sense of reality occurred after October 14th, 2022. But it turns out, yeah, there's this long series of events. I mentioned briefly when I was talking to Jesse Michaels a few months ago that, a voice in my head that I just assumed was sort of your internal dialogue and sort of trying to identify decisions that you make, having a conversation out loud in your head, like, well, what should I do here? What do I do here? But enough of those started to come back into my conscious mind. And then I started to look at other things where I was like, oh, that was weird, but whatever, kind of passed it off. I have a stick in my underwear drawer resulting from one of these things, because I had to take a physical thing back with me from what, as it turned out, was a very overt sort of interaction, but predated these types of overt interactions by 7 or 8 years. But I felt strongly enough about it that I was like, okay, the stick is the symbol that connects these things. And it's very clear now what that was, and what a lot of other events were too, because what happened in Phoenix that night, there's been 7 or 8 other interactions since, with varying levels of obscurity and high strangeness, but clearly the same sorts of interactions, where it was almost like that had to happen with other people who both witnessed it and who were involved in it for me to believe it, so that I could start paying attention to those things in more concrete terms.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I was actually going to ask you, since that experience, has it continued to build or ramp up? And it sounds like it has. Anything that's jumping out for you, about recent experiences?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, like I said, a sliding scale of strangeness, but one in particular that took place, that yeah, I wouldn't know where to start. A lot of times it's pretty just, okay, it's a conversation. It's very conversational, which is strange to say this, and I probably sound like a schizophrenic, but I'm not. So one night I was laying in bed, and I woke up around about 2:00, and I got the sense that there was something above my house. I think this is the first time I've said this publicly. There's something above my house. I felt it. I felt a presence. And that thing that they did telepathically with this communication, the sort of energy exchange that took place on that balcony in Phoenix, it was the same thing. I woke up like, oh wow, this is familiar. I remember this, but it was slower. Like it in Phoenix, it was like this just mind fuck of light and like fiber optic cables being shoved into your eyeballs, and it was just really intense. But it was that same sort of situation, just slower and a little more like flowy light, beautiful thing. And I woke up maybe for 30 seconds, like, oh, that's crazy. laid back down, went to sleep instantly. And I never do that. I'm always up. I have anxiety and thinking about all the worst things that could happen in the world. Go to sleep instantly. Same thing, straight back into it. Do that for about another half hour. Wake up. Oh, this goes on just like that same pattern for about a 5-hour period. And I woke up the next day and I'm, remembering this, like told my wife, like, yeah, this thing happened. My kid's like, oh yeah, there was a UFO over our house last night. He's 10. I don't know if he's being serious or not, but he claims to have seen like the shadow move. And we live in a very dark place, and I don't know. And he's we've been talking about this around him since he was a baby. So who knows how much of that he's just parodying, or take it for what it's worth. Mm-hmm. I don't put much faith in it. He's a smart, empathetic kid. So maybe, and it wouldn't really shock him if there was at this point. But I was telling my wife this, and she pointed out that it was easier for me, and it was. I didn't really think about that, but in Phoenix, because it was such a short interaction with this just force feeding information telepathically, like it messed me up. It messed me up big time. I slept for 14 hours. I woke up crying for until they took that away the next morning. None of that. Just woke up like nothing had even happened, but I knew it was the same thing. It was just they did it through my subconscious as opposed to through my conscious, which was a way easier way of accepting that information.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. I know Deb's probably got some follow-up, so I'm going to pass it to her.
Yeah, of course I do. I have so many things I could say, but before I do, since we are talking about some of your experiences, you kind of dropped that something happened when you were 9 and then didn't really expound upon that when you were recently being interviewed on Fade to Black. So I was wondering if you're willing to talk about that.
Oh, yeah. And the reason I didn't go into detail about that with Jimmy is because it's in the first 2 books I wrote, where I just talk about looking up and seeing Whitley Strieber's book Communion on the living room shelf. And it's actually, I'm glad you brought this up, because it kind of dovetails with what Nathan said, is that reconceptualizing these experiences. I saw that what happened briefly is that there was kind of this flash of light, and I imagine, I think in pictures already, but I sort of saw a different way in pictures, an early hominin, modern human, and then this quintessential gray alien form on the cover of Whitley's book. And then the idea as well, like this idea, could they be future humans? And as I always point out, obviously that lays the table for confirmation bias and selection bias. But, I went through the scientific process to be sure that I wouldn't be affected by those things. But I initially thought of that as a precognition thing, because I have had moments of conscious precognition about 4 or 5 times since, one just before that event that took place in Phoenix. So I'd always thought of it that way. But then after experiencing some of these things more recently, I look back on that and I'm like, well, was that just like this initial bridge that was built, this initial kind of connection point between this sort of non-local consciousness and this physical body that I've inhabited throughout my life? And I don't know. I can't figure that out. Someone just the other day on Twitter posted something about, are these psi experiences like us connecting, or is it us manifesting, where has free will involved? I don't remember exactly what they said. I can't even remember movie quotes from my favorite movies, for God's sakes. But like I've asked myself that question a lot, like how much of it is this sort of ethereal, all-encompassing, non-dual consciousness permeating this physical reality, or how much of it is us communicating with ourselves through time, like remote viewing and all of these things? How do we integrate all of these? Is there even a common thing that unites them? I don't know. So yeah, that's one of the things I've sort of reconceptualized since, like, what was that moment? Why at that age makes sense. And I've heard this over and over from people that it's age 8, it's age 9, it's right around there. And interestingly, that's when the Catholic Church says that you have volition. And that's when you can start to, go through the process of learning the religion, because you're old enough as determined by them. And interestingly, whatever this source or non-local consciousness might be, that's the age that they start picking people out too, apparently, because I've heard that time and time again since 2018 when I first started talking about this.
Man, I'm developing more questions as we go, and the people in the chat are also coming up with great questions. So we're gonna have to try to squeeze them in here, and then get back to Cabby questions. But first of all, I want to ask you: there's been a lot of experiencers, some quite, most notably Terry Lovelace, that have reported these insectoid type figures. You've spoken about them. Anjali reported meeting an insectoid type of figure as well. I'm curious if that's caused a change in your behavior, whereby, like, for example, you won't call the exterminator to take care of and kill insects in your home.
Yeah, it has very much so. There's a funny story actually about that, because I used to have spider nightmares all the time.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a published book that tells this story somewhere. I wish I could remember who it was, but an author.
Arachnophobia. Sorry.
It was actually, yes. I was a co-screenwriter for that movie. I was 7, but I was very precocious. So, no, I don't know who it was. I wish I could remember. I've even tried searching my Gmail account to find any keyword that might tell me who it was. But so I used to have these conscious nightmares. I would wake up and my brain would see either giant spiders or hordes of little spiders on my pillow, on the wall. I mean, you can ask any ex-girlfriend about this, and my wife too, because I've had this my entire life, really. So I wake up and I start running around and I'm swatting at the wall and I'm lifting up the bed and throwing it aside and trying to find this giant crazy spider. And then slowly, like, my conscious takes over, my subconscious subsides, and I'm like, oh, okay, go back to bed. But then after all this shit started happening, it does, it's kind of cliche. It's like Ryan Gosling in that sketch with Kate McKinnon on Saturday Night Live, where it's all like love and light. Like, I stopped hunting. I can't kill things anymore. That's how we got meat for the last 12 years. I would go out and I'd shoot an elk or 2 deer every year. I can't do that anymore. It felt like cheating. And yeah, spiders. I let out spiders. Now, not in the wintertime, because they just lay there in the snow and die, and it's really sad and probably mean in some way. So I just let them live in the house in the winter, set them free in the summer. I've just become a raging hippie, I guess, as a result of all of these things. But what's interesting is the spider dream stopped. I haven't had one in probably 3 years. It's
Wow.
just gone.
Wow. This is really interesting, because I was asking you this question as a funny, and I didn't know that it actually would have been resonant with you. I'm kind of the same way. Nathan can tell you about the bugs. I've sent him photos when I've saved in different sorts of insects that are on my car, and this ant who was at my desk for weeks hanging out with me while I was working.
Love ants.
So,
Ants are
yeah,
such amazing creatures.
they're so cool.
Big fan.
I'm going to ask one more question, because that one was actually meant to just to be funny. But I just
Sorry.
wanted to ask, no, that was great. Thank you.
I'm trying to keep them short too, because there's 3 of you and 1 of me.
You're
But I did want to tell that story because it's kind of been a crazy thing that's happened to me lately.
It is very enlightening for us, because I think a lot of us have experienced something similar. I have. I'm sure the cabbies have as well. I want to ask you this real quick, though. This is a simple one, but tell me what it's like when you go to an event and you do meet up with some of your fellow PhDs who are sharing in this interest. Obviously, you met Diana. I suppose you've met Dr. Kreipel. I'm sure you've met several PhDs. You may have met Dr. Nolan as well. What is it like? You hadn't met him, but even just for the other 2, what is it like when you meet these folks in person? What's that connection like?
It's pretty cool. You have the sense that we're all in this together. There's not a huge community of PhDs working on this, and even though there has been for a long time, and it's important to recognize all the people that had both in the invisible college and in the visible college, because it's kind of what it's becoming, is more of a visible college where we just that I think what happened is we got to a point where the call to action has usurped the worry that we'll be affected as individuals, or ego might be hurt or will suffer in some way
Tenure.
with regard to, yeah. And if you look at the people that are doing this, it's those that have gotten to the point where we don't have to care about that anymore. And I meticulously did that. I made sure I was writing my book. I first started writing my first book in 2012. I was still 3 years out from tenure. I was still 5 years out from reaching full professor status, but I was publishing and very active in the publisher parish community. So I saw a path to that and knew I would eventually reach that because I was collaborating across a lot of different fields with a lot of different people. But I think even outside of people who do have those protections, there's a group of people who are coming up like, wait, that first part where it's more important than ego and your reputation and your status at an institution kind of trumps that too. So I think there's just more, and honestly, that coalesces with or correlates with the stigma being reduced and people like David Grush coming out, and obviously the New York Times article in 2017. So there's a lot of things happening. They're kind of moving in concert with each other. But when we get together, it's just, I feel like it's mostly just a communal experience. We're all coming from different places, with the exception of a few, like my friend Hussein Ali Agrama. He was probably one of the first academics I met in this space. He's a anthropology professor at the University of Chicago, but he's also doing cultural anthropology research and religion and ethnic studies, whereas I'm more on the biological side. So even though we're in the same field, there's a lot of variation in the different subfields of anthropology. So we're in the same place, but we're not. But we still, very early on, I felt that connection with him. And he's an incredible bastion of this question among academics and brings us together in so many different ways. And I commend him for that. But yeah, I think it's just a kind of camaraderie, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, well, I hope someday we can get you all at a big conference table and just sitting around having just an open conversation, and we just, roll the cameras and turn the mics on, and I think that would just, the community would just love it. So
yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Nathan, what do you think? Should we read? Do you want to read some of the questions now?
Sure, we can
Start with Mick. Whatever.
Yeah, let's see. So our fan here, Mick, he's asking, can you expand on the non-causality of future humans interacting back in time and there being no pollution of the timeline? He's, I guess, wants you to expound a little bit on the block universe theory.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, I could send an article if you want. I've kind of used it as my default for the last couple of years that explains it really well. I also cited it in my second book, The Extra Tempestural Model, because I think it's one of the clearest. It was written by a philosopher, but I feel like they know time better than physicists, because physicists are still trying to understand it as fundamental when they also admit that it's emergent. So there's a circle to be squared there. But in the block universe model, which is the most conventionally understood way of thinking about time and space, time-space as one thing, in it, all moments from beginning to end, everything that exists in space-time, in this universe, in this cycle potentially through the universe, because it's possible that everything at the end of it might just get funneled back to the beginning and becomes the Big Bang, thus not violating the law of conservation of mass and energy. But in that block universe, all those moments already exist. They're all there. So if you're jumping around from this place or that place in space-time, another way of thinking of is this time from this time to this time. And a lot of people flatten it to a sheet, a flat sheet. They call it landscape time. That's one of the names for block time, because it's easier to take out one of the dimensions of space and just imagine yourself jumping around on that into different times. They're all connected. They're all there. They all exist as one entity. And so when you go back into the past, You're not changing anything. You're just doing what you would have always done and had always done in that moment. And because that predates you leaving to go do it, any change as you think of it has already manifested itself by the time you go back to do it. You're just connecting those things. You can almost think of it like the past waiting for you with open arms. Like, well, come on and do this thing so we can have this self-consistency between your moment and this moment. And then once you go do it, those are connected. You're not changing anything. You're just interacting with that past. And it's easier to think about it too in the context of meeting yourself. If you have a memory as a kid, say you're 6 years old, and you have a memory of meeting your 30-year-old self, you know for certain that when you get to be 30, you're going to go back in time and meet your 6-year-old self. Those two moments in time are just connected in that way, intrinsically. The universe is that way. And I drew heavily from the Igor Novikov principle, one of the leading archetypes of the block universe, self-consistency. It's actually named after him because of that. And it's the best we can do now. And it does make a lot of sense. And it also gets around a lot of perceived paradoxes associated with backward time travel.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I'd like to get that article as well, and I'll send it to Mick via email because I certainly
Cool. Yeah, just
know
remind me
more
after the show or tomorrow morning.
I will.
And
I'll email you.
I'll forward that.
That'd
Sir.
be awesome.
Nathan, what do you want to read next?
Well, I wanted to sort of follow up a little bit on what you were talking about earlier, and this sort of growing interest in the academic community, but also as it relates to, I think, traditional ways of learning and expanding academic knowledge. So, what are the different qualities of research into the phenomena? Maybe it's an experiential quality that in some ways change the way research of it is being done. There seems to me to be a much greater participatory quality to the analysis than I don't know, maybe a more of a cold, rational, assimilating objective facts and trying to piece things together. The individuals themselves are really part and parcel of the phenomenon itself. And so that came to mind as we were talking about your interactions with these other researchers, that they themselves have their own kinds of experiences with this. And so that becomes part of the study, and it makes it a little bit different than the way we might have studied things in the past. How do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great question. Well, it's funny because I'm on both sides of that. I had never seen a UFO. I'd never had an experience that I thought of as an experience until 2022 when both happened. I saw 5 UFOs at the same time and then had a number of obscure experiences. But I didn't need that. I didn't have to have that in order to be able to take this seriously and consider other people's testimonies that did see UFOs or did get abducted or did have telepathic communications or remote viewing experiences or near-death experiences. I didn't have to be along with them as they crossed that threshold to the other side to know that they're telling the truth, because there's so many people saying the same thing. And that's what it always was for me in this space, is there's so many people saying the same thing, describing the same types of things. And then we can use an abductive approach to tease out the patterns and lace those together in this tapestry of reality that exists somewhat circumstantially around our circumscribed reality. Sorry about all the circas in there. But like Jeff Kripal, you mentioned him earlier, or you did, DJ, I don't remember who, but yeah, like it's that he wrote a whole book about that called The Flip, an amazing book. And there is an audio book version of it too, because I know most people prefer those these days. But it's about how people start out as hard, cold, detached, reductionist, materialist scientists. If we can't put a p-value to it, piss off because we don't even want to discuss it. And then something happens, whether it's UFOs or near death or intense psychedelic trip, they flip. And they're like, oh, wait, there's a deeper reality that maybe we should be paying attention to. And they do start paying attention to that, and they become vocal about it. That I witnessed this firsthand just last week. One of our first friends, where I live and work in Butte, Montana, we met them, I think, the first week we moved here back in 2009. And they were parked on Park Street, the main street that goes up to campus. And she's in the car with her husband right after the big faculty meeting. And I walk by and she smacks him and says, "Go talk to that guy. You need to go talk to that guy." And he comes up like, "Hey, what's going on? We should be friends." Like, not as awkward as that, but pretty close to being awkward as that. If you knew him, you would know just how awkward it was. And again, one of my best friends of all time and has been. So just recently, she had a Kundalini awakening, an experience that took her out of her body for a brief period of time. And they, whatever they is, took over her body and released all of these things. And she's a physics professor. She had always been one of these strict materialist people. And she's telling me all these things and what she thinks and knows and feels. And it's just like, wow, to watch that happen in real time with someone you've known for close to 15 years, just, and all her friends think she's crazy. All her relatives think she's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, no, that checks out. I know a lot of people said that same thing. And she just starts crying like, "Oh my God, thank you so much. Like, I thought I was losing my mind and everybody tells me I'm crazy." But it's real. There's this reality that exists beyond us. And I almost feel bad for people who don't realize that. You don't have to have your own experience, but just listen to other people's experience and open your mind enough, because there's so much that comes flooding in. And it's amazing, to see that. But I also understand the hang up, because I was forced through that same sieve of hypothesis testing and the strict regimen of the scientific method. But it doesn't apply to this. And that doesn't mean we have to give up on understanding this or studying it. It just means we have to modify our understanding of science to include these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. It seems almost as if the 21st century, there's an emergent quality to our understanding here that you're touching on, that and maybe we almost have these two paths before us, to acknowledge that that's very much a part of reality, and we need to incorporate it, as you're saying, into our study and pursuit. But at the same time, we're also being confronted in many ways with even greater sort of technology that kind of forces us to be reduced and atomized, even further than we are now, kind of objectified further than we are now. So almost these two sort of paths in front of us to choose. And I don't know, it's a fraught time, it feels.
Yeah, but don't you think that that's maybe a false dichotomy? Like, why does it have to be two paths? There could be all of these paths.
Totally.
And we can sort of amalgamate them.
Yeah, well, I'd hope we do, right? I don't think we should become. I'm not a proponent of being sort of a Luddite and just shunning all that and turning our backs to technology.
You should coin that term, Nathan. A experiential Luddite, where you just shut out everything that doesn't fit.
Right. That. Yeah. I'll think about that. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree. We have to take an integrative approach to it.
For sure.
That's what I see happening essentially with phenomenological studies that we're observing. There seems to be this growing acknowledgement that this is a real aspect of the world, of reality, and we need to treat it with
slowly. It's so slow, though. That's the part that I hate. Is it just feels when you've been seeing all of these things and not seeing like even personally, but just like that there's something else. UFOs, just take UFOs. People have been talking about this for potentially millennia, and we might be moving towards something that really is transformational. And I hope it is, and I think it will be. But like when you already kind of see the process, the evolution, it does seem to be accelerating. At least it's painfully slow. Don't you guys think? I don't know.
Yes,
guys and gals. I'm going to ask Deb specifically because she hasn't said much.
She's next, but
asshole Y chromosomes have been dominating the conversation.
Actually,
get up in there.
Can I just comment that I've been doing a deep dive on chromosomes, for instance, and I will tell you that in most living organism populations, it's matriarchal societies.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to throw that out there.
You're smarter than us. What are you going to do?
Bonobos and chimps are one of the best examples because bonobos are sex, love, rock and roll matriarchs. Chimps are the only other species other than us that have been observed going to war. Patriarchal. I feel like that's worth mentioning.
You and I have a lot to talk about that, but I wanted to I wanted to do something that kind of laces things together. I like that phrase that was used earlier, but there was this story on YouTube called The Egg. And it is about how everything in the past and the present and the future are all happening at the same time. And in fact, everyone is basically one conscious entity. I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but it kind of reminds me of Indigenous Australian beliefs of dream time, which is
Hmm.
everywhere, everyone, past, present, and future. So I was wondering when you think about this sense of future and time, if you ever have a cultural perspective to it.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think that's so important that for my first book, I hired 2 research assistants to do a lot of digging with regard to mostly UFO stuff, because it wasn't like I'd been following it since I was a child and always found it fascinating, but I hadn't really dived in at that point. But also aspects of time travel, and then also parts of like different cultural perspectives of time. And then I eventually cut them loose on the other 2 things, and I went deep into that because I found it fascinating, not just how many different cultures don't have a word for time, don't talk about it, don't conceptualize it linearly like we do, but also just um, the way it can impact our lives. I cited a couple studies where thinking about time can even impact your health and well-being. I can't talk about that too much, but I was with the Navajo Ranger John Dover recently,
Yes.
and we were looking at things throughout Utah, petroglyphs, geoglyphs, not really geoglyphs, but cave paintings and things. And I was asking about this one, the spiral that you always see for the equinox, where it's within like not a cave, but it's just outside of this rock formation, and they drew a line on either side. And he was saying it's because in that area in the Southwest, they see time almost like a record, where there's a needle and it moves, across time, essentially, like it's moving out slowly but also up, so it's like records stacked on top of each other. And I remember reading almost that exact same description from a Westerner perspective in Paul Davies' book about time when I was in graduate school, or an undergraduate. Actually, it's that same sort of a way of conceptualizing it that we eventually got to, but they made this hundreds of years ago. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in looking at how others have conceptualized time, space, consciousness, reality. Um, but yeah, there's even some that don't think about it. They don't have a word for it. They don't think it's even worth talking about because I forget which culture it was. In my first book, I referenced it specifically, but they see themselves walking backward through time, where they can see what happened in the past, but they don't know what's behind them, so they don't bother talking about it. There's no words for it because they're just slowly walking backward through time and watching what already took place, but experiencing things as it sort of comes from their periphery into their visual field.
It's amazing. Our relationship to time is, like you said, it's very frustrating. It feels like it's moving slowly, and it's just us as humans, our relationship to time. We're only here for 100 years or less, and that's, off average right there. And then we want it now. And it's just like, they may not, clearly the phenomenon is not on, probably not on our timetable as far as when it wants to disclose, elements when they want to.
But I remember when I first started this journey, which was I started it as a kid. And then it sort of ramped up in 2012. I just was compelled to start writing. And I had one of my students who was already employed on a grant project. I rehired him after the grant ran out. And I said, hey, do you want to help me write a book about UFOs? And we brought another extremely intelligent person involved, and she contributed so much. But it was like, why now? Why now? And it seems to have played out in this way that made sense. Like there's something about understanding or it's like what this talk about Jeff Kripal. I don't want to dominate the show, but it's definitely someone everybody should check out if they're not familiar with his work. But he
He'll be on
refers to
too.
these as literary angels, you know, where things just sort of fall into your lap from these various places. You don't know why. I heard that Whitley Strieber talk about this with Kelly Chase recently on her podcast too, where it's like you don't even think of them as coincidences anymore. You kind of just open up and wait for them. And I've experienced this with all 3 books that I've written. It's just like the universe hands you this thing, you know? And so how do you conceptualize time in that context? I don't know. More questions than answers.
It's interesting. I was thinking about you in that book, Way Above Black by Staff Sergeant Dan Sherman, the former intuitive communicator. We've been talking about it a lot in private. The cabbies have, and I'll share. If I hadn't shared it with you, I'll share the book and the interview with Dan. But what the stitch with you is, you know, he says that his mom was abducted. When he was read into this program, his mom was abducted in 1960, and then she
was he the one that they modified him in the womb?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm familiar with that. We chatted about that last week, I think, right?
I didn't, because I didn't speak to you unless we just chatted about it on. Did we send voicemails, or was it just maybe we texted about it a little bit? But the reason I asked,
but fill everybody in if they're not familiar with that.
So the book is called Way Above Black. It's on Goodreads. Staff Sergeant Dan Sherman went to school for ELINT with the Air Force, and while there, he said that he was brought into a room, asked if he wanted to sign into a special access program, what they called a quote gray unquote program, and that is where he agreed to do it. And then they started telling him about his history and that he had been abducted, and essentially he was going to be an intuitive communicator that would communicate with ETs. And what they said to him after he had made it through school, he was at a cover school while he was going to his actual job school that they really wanted him there for. He was to type what they told him into a box and hit enter, basically. And he didn't know what the letters and numbers meant until later. He sort of figured it out. There's also an interviewer, a brilliant interview. I was going to say your interview with Jesse was amazing. The young lady, while it was a truncated interview, wasn't that long. She did a brilliant job interviewing Dan Sherman as well. Do you think that and after this, what I want to do, guys, is if we can get the listener questions, and we'll ask Mike to do them in a rapid fire format because we don't have them for that much longer. But I would like to ask, do you think you may have experienced something similar in your genealogy as Dan Sherman that enabled you to communicate with them without the training that he went through?
I don't think so. And and after these things happen more conspicuously, I told my mom and stepdad. She might be listening right now. She was asking me to send her the link to this.
Hi, Mom.
Hey, Mom.
Great job with Mike, by the way.
Oh, I kind of hope she is now. She could get a kick out of that. But no, I asked, you know, I was like, has anybody in our family seen a UFO? Like, my grandma had this amazing ability to go to church, and she didn't play the piano at all. Didn't know G from A from C. She'd come home and just start playing every song that they played in church that day. I'm like, where's that come from? Like, are y'all hiding something? You know, which one of you is the abductee who got knocked out by a gray alien here? Because that doesn't seem normal.
No.
And then everybody accused me of getting her skills. I'm like, no, I worked my ass off to learn how to play music, and it was really hard, and I hated it. So no, I don't think so, because I've asked that question. What we did learn in that process is my stepdad saw a UFO once. He's a farmer in Ohio, and he had kind of an interaction, but it wasn't too overt. My biological father did too before I was born, which kind of led out of this. But no, I've looked down the genealogy. I've asked the people that I know that would know people, but also nobody talked about that stuff back then. You know, maybe my great grandma got knocked up in some sort of abduction situation, but I don't think that's necessary. I don't think it even has to be that way. Like
Right.
maybe the genetics are a precursor for some people, or maybe it is like very much so for a lot of people, but also it seems to be related to one of the people that was involved in this experience in Phoenix on the balcony. I've gotten to know him since Jesse's doco came out. The first time I was willing to talk about it, getting over all of the heebie-jeebies and the weirdness of it. But he's been working with researchers at high-level institutions to try to understand this, and has a huge network of people that he's both helping and both being helped by to understand this, because nobody has it all figured out, and we are all asking as many questions as anybody else. But for him, it was like he was turned on. He had a moment where a UFO pinned him down. That's where he was switched on. He also mentioned that for a lot of people, it's trauma. It's early childhood trauma, where it's almost like an out-of-body experience, but through having to just deal with things that are hard for you. And I kind of wonder if that's what it was for me, where I started to really sort of tune in on a different frequency just to deal with shit going on as a kid, you know? So I don't think it has to be that. I don't think you have to have a genetic lineage. I don't think you have to be pinned down by a UFO. Maybe you don't even have to have trauma. I don't know. It seems like everybody could honestly tap into whatever this is. Is it related to UFOs as, you know, an object? My gut says yes, but I don't know. Maybe we're talking about two different things too. Maybe they aren't even related. I have no idea.
Many roads lead to Rome, right? So let's hit up some of these in a rapid fire format, so we could get through some. I got one from Dave Smethers. I know Smethers will never let it go, right, Nathan? If I don't ask his. So let's get this one from Boo the Beagle, and tell me if this is analogous. They're basically talking about whether the spirit knowledge is the of past time, present, and future is as valid as ET or future humans. I'm not sure I understand the question. Does anybody here?
I think I do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Boo. But I think it's what I was just saying. Like, how are these related? How are these experiences? Like, what happened to me in Phoenix, where they gave me information for the future, which clearly indicates they know the future. Is that related to UFOs? I don't know. I feel like that's what the question was about, and I'm sorry if I was wrong about that, but it's rapid
I think
fire.
you're right.
So.
But you get the answer that we don't know is just, it's the most valid answer to so many of these questions. What we know is so little compared to what we don't know, but it's so much fun to talk about.
It is, and I try to differentiate between speculation and I am drawing from a base of knowledge about, but this one, I don't know. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that too.
Let me see if I can understand this from see if I can understand this question from Dave. Basically, if what he's saying is, if Dr. Master says the future cannot be changed, why are humans acting in ways that suggest they are trying to change it? For me, this is the weakest part of the otherwise compelling theory.
Well, it's not a weak part of the theory. It's a weak part of our understanding of time and of this reality, which, of course, by default, does trickle into this theory. So I agree with that assessment. And honestly, I've had this conversation with my wife for the last 15, since I met her, since we first started talking about this, honestly, because it's like she pointed that out early on. And if everything's already in existence in the block universe, why try? And so I took that to heart. And in my second book, The Extra Tempestura Model, in the end, I go into this conversation and bring in elements of that conversation I've had with her over the last 15 years and put it in the context of the sort of cataclysm thing that a lot of people think is coming, and it's become the main thing that every experiencer has experienced. So why even show up if it's already predetermined, versus how are there ways to maybe tweak it? And that's what she always argued, is that maybe the block universe isn't just a static block, but it's somewhat malleable in individual moments that can move it in a place that still all those moments are connected, but it's not exactly one concrete thing. And at first I was like, I don't know, I have to think about that. And lately I've been like, she's probably right, because women usually are in relationships.
Money Nathan.
Please tell her I said that, by the way.
Your wife's a smart lady. Go.
Absolutely.
She is that.
All right, here's a question from Anonymous Rex. Could we please ask Dr. Masters his thoughts on portals existing? It's a big one.
Quick hitters, Mike.
It is, yeah. I don't know. Portals in what sense, I guess, would be my follow-up, but this format doesn't necessarily, it's not conducive to follow-ups. But I don't know if we need them. I don't think we need like a wormhole sort of situation to travel through time. I think space-time has the holes available, or we can make them wherever we want. But if we're talking about the lexicon, then yes, that would technically become a portal if you're moving in and out of something in different moments of space-time. So yeah, I don't think they need to exist in the way that we conceptualize them with wormholes, but I think we could call them that.
And Debs, my friend.
From Carolina, it is, I'd love to understand more about the telepathic communication, but most importantly, thanks for sharing and for being open with us.
Thank you, Carolina.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was hard. It was a whole year between when it happened, almost exactly 1 year. And I kind of had a breakdown. I was sitting out on my back deck, and I was, absorbing the sunshine, and I was like, can I talk about this? And it's really, and honestly, it's not that big of a deal compared to the things that people experience all the time in this arena. It's like, wow, yeah, okay, so some humans were there, and you're talking to something. And so, yeah, I eventually realized that we all have to. I dedicated my second book to the people that are brave enough to talk about these things. And so within a short period of time, I talked about it with Jesse Michaels, who I knew and trusted. And I told him about it because I was already in LA hanging out with him in December, just a couple months after this happened. And my mind was still all shaken up. So I'm just spewing out, like what happened. He's just looking at me, and his cameraman's looking at me, and like, what? And then I had a feeling he would want to talk about it when I went back down in October. And so the day before that, I kind of had this breakdown, like, can I? And they said, please talk about it. I was like tasked with this in some capacity. And between that and like knowing he's a good resource and a trustworthy person, I was like, let's do this thing. And then publicly, I spoke about it for the first time in New York City at that amazing experiencer conference they put on there. And then the very next day went on with George Knapp, coast to coast, between 1 and 5 a.m., which is very difficult. Wow. I'd like to point out, to talk about anything between 1 and 5 a.m. But George asked me to have the whole 4 hours with him to talk about the theory. And then the last 2 hours were to talk about this. And it's like, it's important that we all do, and I guess my rally cry here is let's all just talk about it. We don't have the same stigma we used to. We don't have to be put into these little boxes. We should all be talking about everything, even if it doesn't seem that important, but it's anomalous. The more we do that, the more we learn and can grow and can continue to build these networks of other people who've had these same experiences. Like we were talking about just a bit ago, when Nathan and I were chatting about Darren, like, if it wasn't for him talking about it on his podcast, would I have ever even come to grips with it, and be able to talk about it? So I think it's sort of it's like microevolution, where it's cells evolving slowly, but then you project that forward in a macroevolutionary context where species giving rise to species. And that's how we get there. I think that's how we get there, is by just having these conversations over time. And then eventually we can all wrap our heads around whatever the fuck this is.
Yeah. I mean, that gets me thinking about something I wrote down that I wanted to talk to you about, but that's, we've heard the theory of panspermia, which is just that, the Earth may have been seeded with life from somewhere else through a meteor or something like that. But it takes me to places where, what if it's not just, seeded from chemicals or biological organisms, but there's also a seeding of sort of our conscious development, of the development of, our species in that dimension of experience. And it seems to be that is partly the case. We've been talking about a lot of aspects of that during this show.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and maybe the two go together. Maybe that's why we're seeing so much happening now, as we finally reach the point biologically where we have a brain that's capable of being a big enough antenna to tap into those sort of consciousness aspects of what is maybe even fundamental to our biological being. I was talking with someone this morning, and it was some sort of like, I think I used the word non-dual transmutation, where it almost seems like the two are coming together, where we've evolved as biological beings. Obviously, our intellect has evolved as well. But what if those are going to mash up in some way in the near term? And maybe that's related to disclosure. Maybe it's related to AI and where we're getting with that so quickly, where we take our non-dual understanding of the universe, a super evolved consciousness, and then just integrate it in what may be a very quick and shocking fashion for people, with this sort of slow process of evolution, where beyond the sort of singularity that exists and those two particles colliding, to use the hadron collider metaphor, what if beyond that we just are, we are the thing we always were, the conscious thing that maybe spurred this biological existence that isn't real. It's not the main thing, but it's clearly tied to that, or it's rooted in that, or that's the origin source in some way. And we're moving toward a place where those become this sort of non-dual transmutational existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that made any sense whatsoever.
No, it's like a process of maturation.
Sorry if it didn't.
So if you have children, like, I mean, I'm thinking of it from that
Yeah.
perspective, that they're slowly learning about the world around them. You're trying to give them experiences that are analogous to real world experiences, but they have to grow, and eventually they hopefully grow to the point where they can experience the world as it really is, or close to that.
I'm
you're
feeling
not
really
going to
good
teach
right
quantum mechanics to a 3-year-old because they're not capable of understanding it. But as they grow and develop, when do you start teaching quantum mechanics to a child? You might try in high school. If they're really precocial, sure, go on. They go to Harvard, as a 12-year-old. But it takes having that baseline understanding or physical ability. And I think it does come down to what is this and that? What is this physical, or what is that? Because I don't know. Yeah, I really appreciate that metaphor. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I am feeling better about this because my high school friends have told me I haven't matured intellectually since high school, but now I feel like there's hope. So this is great, man.
Yeah. Where there's a will, there's a way, I guess.
See? Yeah, I mean,
For
I have
me-
a beard
for
like
me, it
Dr.
was
Masters,
just-
so I feel like let me I have two
You're
things I
looking
want to
for
say. Mike, one of them is you made
Do
reference
you?
to Jesse
Do
Michaels.
you, DJ?
I do. I mean, you just the light isn't really here, but I feel like my beard is on
Oh,
par
there it
with
is.
yours tonight.
There it is. I see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a couple sprouts there.
So with Jesse Michaels, unbelievable interviewer. We're big fans of his, and so if you ever get in contact with him and he'd like to join us on Cabinet Discussion, it would be an honor to have him. He's a brilliant interviewer. So secondly,
Yeah, he's great.
Dr. Jeff is coming on for a second show, and if you want to come on for that one, it'd be
Nice.
so cool to hear you guys talk. We had so
I would
much
just
fun
get in
last
his
time.
way. I would get in his way.
Not at
Like
all.
I'm here, and Jeff's like, I can't even reach that high. Like it's
Not at all. The audience wins because they hear
he's-
less of me, so that would be good. So
It'd be a good time.
all right.
You can get him
Ev-
talking. You can get him talking. He's got a lot to say. I like that guy a lot.
All right, Debs, go ahead, homegirl.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to bring up something I've mentioned to you, I think, in a space some time ago, anthrobots and xenobots and the things that we are now creating, including, obviously we're now trying to integrate AI into our bodies with things like Neuralink and stuff. How do you think that's going to impact the typical human evolution, and how will that impact maybe even your theory?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate you asking me that for the last 8 years. And I apologize that I haven't been able to look into it. And I finally did. I did look into it, and I don't. It's really interesting, and I don't know, because it does almost seem like we're sort of approaching a place where it's gonna be both, and we maybe don't have the opportunity to turn back from that, like with the nanobots and even what Elon Musk is trying to do with Neuralink and everything. Like, once we really start, I think we've already reached a point where it's beyond us. It's taken on a life of its own. Does that mean it's going to run away on its own and kill us all and enslave us and become? I don't think so. But we won't be able to resist having a level up where we have to just not wait for the slow process of biological evolution. And it may coalesce with gene modification and CRISPR technology. Maybe they all sort of become one thing, where it's all of them just making us faster, better. People used to ask me, how long do you think it would be before we become the Greys? And I always thought about it in a very limited capacity. I'll call past Michael out on that, because I used to just think about it as biological evolution, disregarding things like nanobots, disregarding things like CRISPR technology. If this does happen, where we get to the point where it's socially acceptable and it's ethical and it's done right, and that may be a place where if this happens in the future, they're coming back, they might be like, hey, we need to make sure this happens right, because you're talking about us. This is our future. This is your future. It's our past. I think the future of humanity is wide open. It can be whatever we want it to be. We can shape it. We can shape all moments in between then too. And that might be where if they are future humans in these UFOs, it might be where they're doing it in a functional capacity, not just with a sperm and egg, which is so ubiquitous throughout these cases, but with like cultural seeding, with like giving these technologies, with these crashes or these gifts that are given to us. Figure this out, because you're going to need this soon. And we're going to meet at this point in the future where everything just goes gangbusters. So yeah, I really do think that's an important aspect of this. It might be a big part of why we're seeing them more now. It might be a big part of why this disclosure movement is happening as quickly as it is as well.
Yeah, I just want to point out to anyone listening that this technology is over a decade old, and scientists were meeting and talking about making human beings over 10 years ago. So I think that's very linked to this future human hypothesis.
Do you think that male pattern baldness could be eradicated? Asking for a friend.
Honestly, I think yes. Like we've got the genome mapped out, right? So that they're still uncovering more things about genes, but they're doing it at a rapid pace. They're probably going to start using AI to help them figure some of these things out. So all of these things are possible, and we really have all of this within our reach.
Thank you, Deb. I will sleep easier tonight.
Absolutely. There's a lot of other things that can kill us, that we could treat congenital diseases through genetic manipulation. And I don't feel like male pattern baldness will be one of those, honestly. And the fact you should rest assured knowing that most of the Greys are described as hairless beings. You're the future of evolution, my friend. How many wisdom teeth do you have? How many wisdom teeth do you have? Because there's also 11% of the population that just doesn't have their third molar.
I will count them tomorrow and let you know. I don't know.
You've never counted your molars.
No.
I'm just saying, if you had both, you might be like the sperm donor of the future if you're bald and don't have your third molar coming in, because that's like next level future human shit right there, man.
Nathan,
I'm
tell
just saying, don't count it up. The grays are bald. You should embrace that.
That's why they
tell
have
Darren at our next
on
pizza
their
meetup, Nathan, I'm going to be hell on wheels, man. I'm going to bring some basal ganglia and an enlarged caudate putamen with me. So anyway,
all the topics. I love it.
Dude, so would it be if you had third molars growing out of your basal ganglia? Like they didn't come through your mouth, they're just like in the back of your head. You're like, what? But you know everything.
This is awesome. The only thing Mike can do to top all this is to bring one of his musical instruments, because Dr. Simeon Hine did play guitar for us on air. So it would be great to have Mike play
nice.
one of the instruments.
I've got my guitar and mandolin sitting behind me, but
we are so game for
I'll
you to play.
I'll get in trouble.
Okay.
I'll get in trouble if I don't go down and eat soon.
All right.
Let's factor that into the.
Okay. We'll let you get out of here. I have one final question from basically it was from the a show you did the other day, and it was a quote. I think maybe I'm paraphrasing, but I think the quote was something like we are the only bipedal mammal on the planet. I repeat, we're the only bipedal mammal on the planet.
Habitually bipedal.
Okay. Because I thought
that's an important
you may have left out Sasquatch or Bigfoot. So.
Oh, damn it. You're right. I did.
Because I Googled the directions between your institution and 250 miles to the south, Dr. Jeff Meldrum at Idaho State, who can host you with
sure
his laboratory with 300.
No, you're right. He's got some prints. He's got some, No, you're right. I would like to retrospectively apologize for that massive blunder in stating that we're the only habitually bipedal mammal, because Sasquatch, definitely bipedal. However, I would like to point out that they don't exist. So I'm still right.
Oh, so we do have to. So we'll have to arrange that.
Just putting that out there. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I had a lot of trolls after this conversation, and I felt like the best way to do that is by saying free will doesn't exist, nor does Sasquatch. So,
I love it.
Bring it on.
Come on, trolls. Bring it.
All right.
We're going to have some fun after this one.
I appreciate it. Let's go with Cabby goodbye so we can get Mike to a hot dinner.
It's a salad, so
I get to go first. Okay, I was just thinking that trolls may have ancestrally been Sasquatch, by the way. Thank you for coming and talking to us. I have a lot of things I'd like to talk to you about, including what telepathy may be. So I really appreciate you coming and having these conversations and being open with us about all of this, because it's just so much fun to have intellectual conversations. We appreciate it so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate you as well, and it was great chatting with you.
Yeah, Mike, it's been a real pleasure. I hope we get a chance to chat in person sometime. However we can arrange that, it'll be really great. You're just a really a blessing to the community, and we're honored to have you with us. So looking forward to the next chat.
Well,
thanks, Nathan. And I feel the same. Let's definitely make that happen sometime.
Awesome.
That would be awesome, Mike. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us again. I can already see a part 3, because I know that every cabbie has questions left on their sheet that they made up for you. So we'd love to have you back for part 3.
Yeah.
You're just so much fun.
That'd be great, man. And honestly, I've got just as many questions as they do. I have no idea what's going on. So I appreciate us all having this conversation and trying to figure it out together.
I hope we get to meet you. Come out to North Carolina, because now I live close enough to Darren and Nathan that we can all meet up for a pizza like I met up with these guys last time. So,
Let's do it.
thank you.
Let's do it.
Thank-
Looking forward to that.
I am so down. So, on behalf of Dr. Masters and Debs and Nathan and Julie in the chat and everybody, thank you for joining us to come and see and have some questions for Dr. Masters. So, this DJ saying peace out, one love. We'll see you down the road. And as always, we're wondering what's up around the bend.